Welcome to the Catholic Audio Media Podcast, and of course, as you know, where we represent or we recognize Jesus' greatest act of defiance. All the great forces tried to silence him, and he just went, watch this. So anyway, so here we are, CatholicAudioMedia.com, and you can check us out and pass the word, let people know. I'm hearing good things about our new format, and thank you to those who have spoken up and said, hey, we really like this. It's a whole different format. It really works pretty well. And so thank you. So we're continuing remember last week we looked into the whole story of Genesis, and as I like to describe it, that crazy family of Abraham. But what we saw was the laying of the foundation for what comes part 2, and that all happened in Genesis. We're focusing for these weeks on Exodus. So what we're looking at today is the wild story of Moses, and it's a great story. Yesterday, we kind of talked about how you had this whole change in understanding of the Hebrews, who were considered basically welcome guests of the Egyptians. And then all of a sudden, the administration changes and things get a little hairy because suddenly someone says, well, they could turn on us. And remember what I said yesterday. People get afraid of what could happen, but that doesn't mean it actually will. And that's an important distinction. You know, I mean, look at how much of our world is based on taking action based on what could happen, but that doesn't mean any of it actually will. And that's so important. I told you yesterday the story of me and the prophylactic use of, what was it? Whatever the drug was. I can't remember the exact name. And I think it was chloroquine, hydrochloroquine, something like that. But we won't go there. And but there is a risk. There is a risk, whatever drug it was. There is a risk of going blind and deaf, but it was to prevent you from getting malaria. And I said, I'd rather have malaria. Thank you very much, but, and someone said, you can die from malaria. Yes, I know, but you die seeing and hearing what's going on. I said, come on, I'm not going to take these. Well, in any case, now we're in the next stage. So what happens is we see the great story of the wild thing, the way it happens. And it's like a whole bunch of coincidences. But as you know, there are no coincidences in spirituality. So what we see here is the story of Moses being born, and eventually his mother tried to hide him. Remember what I said yesterday? Don't miss the human factor. You can set a law and you can say, this is the law, that this is the way things are going to be, but that doesn't mean people are going to follow it because of the human factor. And some laws, people say, this is the law, this is the way it's going to be. And some laws, people are like, no. And in doing so, it's amazing. We saw some of that during COVID, but let's give the best example of them all, prohibition. And what was absolutely fascinating, you think some of the politicians are kind of rebels now. Mayor LaGuardia, from whom the airport was named, who was the mayor of New York, there was a loophole in the law of prohibition. There was a loophole there, and that was you could make your own beer. That was true. You couldn't sell beer, but you can make it at home. And he gave away, the mayor of New York gave away the recipe, like to distribute it, of how to make beer at home. It was hysterical. The other side of this, some beer companies made malted milk. That was their product during Prohibition. And anytime I say that, and they'll say such and such a company, they made malted milk, I always wink because I personally don't believe they gave up everything to make malted milk. Sorry, don't believe it. But in any case, that's the human factor. You can say, this is the law, you've got to do it this way. This is something a lot of people in the Catholic Church who are very law-based don't get. We'll say, well, the law says this, that, and the other thing, and they don't account for the human factor. And the human factor, there are many people accounting for the human factor and say, yes, but I can't do this, or it's difficult. And this is where I get upset, because you'll have people turning around and say, well, you just got to suck it up. That's not in church teaching. By the way, that is not in church teaching. What church teaching says is the church understands your weakness and does have the tools to assist you in your weakness and assist you drawing closer to the Lord. That's what the church actually teaches. So all these people turn around and say, you got to suck it up. You're just showing your weakness. Are not speaking for the church. The church understands your weakness. So you see all of that coming together where we recognize the human factor of all the reality. So what happens in today's first reading is the human factor. They give birth to a child. Moses' father and mother give birth to Moses, and the law is that he must be destroyed and he must be killed. And they're like, no, the human factor, the mother's not going to do that. And the father's not going to do that. So she, being the mother, sends the child down the river to keep him alive. And coincidence of coincidences, whether you believe it this way or not, this is what it says. Coincidence of coincidences, the daughter of the daughter of Pharaoh finds the child, wants to bring him up as her own, gets a mother to nurse him, which happens to be his own mother, because a Hebrew woman, call that a Hebrew woman. But remember what we saw at the end of the week last week is God had plans for the Hebrews in Egypt. So we can also see behind the scenes, this is God doing all his plans. As difficult as it may be to think this through, or as difficult it may be to understand that, that's what's being taught, that's what's being said. God is going to do something great here. And as I talked about it before, it's a form of evolution. And we're going to talk about that further down the line, but it's a form of evolution. So what do you want to remember here? The human factor. Don't ever forget that. That's why we have the sacrament of confession. You know, people lose a sense of this and they go, oh no, we're supposed to be perfect. We're supposed to be really perfect, but for those people who aren't perfect, we have confession. No, confession is there to recognize the human factor and to help people through their very humanity. Because remember what Saint Isidore said. The glory of God is a person fully alive. So God is transforming our humanity, right? We understand that he's transforming our humanity, but that accounts for the human factor. But what are people trying to do when they take this all wrong? They're trying to dehumanize themselves, which is exactly what God doesn't want. So we see this human factor come in. So what's going to happen? It's almost like I'll give you a great example of the human factor. January 6th. Now, I'm not going to get into the politics of January 6th, but remember what January 6th started as. It started a rally by President Trump. And then he was at the end of his first term, and he claimed the whole Stop the Steal stuff. And it started a rally. Next thing you know, these people who there's all kinds of question as to whether or not they were all kind of led into Congress. But the next thing you know, these people are marching into Congress. And I remember when this was happening, and I remember when I'm watching this on TV, I hope someone went up to the president saying, what were you thinking? Because he didn't put together the human factor. That human factor is real, and God understands it. But if we take our faith to a point where we dehumanize ourselves, or even our laws or everything else, then we take away the human factor. Here's a great example. I didn't know this. There's this great channel. I can't think of the channel. Hopefully I can remember it prior to our next show. But it's this great guy who talks about the way roads are set up and how roads and traffic lights and everything else. And turns out when civil engineers are planning on intersections, they hold into the factor that time between the green light and the yellow light and the red light when you're trying to figure out whether to go or to stop. Believe it or not, it is figured into the nature of the timing of the light and the length of the road, because they throw in the human factor. You can turn around and say, well, yellow says slow down and red says stop. But many people are kind of like, well, I could still go, or should I? Or, yeah. And that factor is timed in. This is something. When you make your laws, you've got to address the human factor. And again, if you don't, it's like, what were you thinking? My favorite story, I know I've told you the story before. I know you've heard it before. So, you heard it before. Well, you'll hear it again. What the heck? How movies failed when they were first presented. Movies completely failed. Absolutely. And what happened? Well, think of it. Think of the time. Think of they'd never seen. Remember, this is an introduction, so they've never seen movies in their lives. And so they come to a fair, which they have seen before, and they're moved into a tent. And what do you have to do to show a movie? You turn off the lights. So they get moved into a tent, and someone shuts off the lights. Well, the people panic because they thought they were going to be robbed, because that was the human factor. It's like, they're going to rob us. And again, you want. That's when you really want to turn around and go, what were you thinking? Just for a minute here. What were you thinking? You put some people in a tent and shut off the lights, and the next thing you know, the tent is destroyed in their panic. Do you suppose you might have thought that one through a little better? It's the human factor. And this is something that's so key into everything we do. Think of it in some of the laws you see. I didn't think that one through. That's pretty obvious. We're going to be right back right after this. You're listening to Catholic Audio Media. You can now leave a message for us, which we can air and discuss on this program. Just call 617-297-7452. That's 617-297-7452. 617-297-7452. Feel free to call, leave a comment, a question, or even feedback, and we may play it on the air. I can discuss your comment or question as well, so give that a try. 617-297-7452, 617-297-7452. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Patreon. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Check us out. Check what we have to offer. Previews of upcoming podcasts. Previews of upcoming columns over at catholicaudiomedia.substack.com. Your ability to comment, make suggestions, even make suggestions in upcoming programs. Check us out, patreon.com, Catholic Audio Media. We're back, and we're talking about this whole story of Moses being brought up by literally his mother in the Pharaoh's family. Somehow it appears he does understand he's not Egyptian. It doesn't say it directly, but it kind of implies this. And as a matter of fact, he gets upset when an Egyptian kills a Hebrew, and he kills why don't I just read the story? Reminds me when people say, hey, did you see that movie the other day about the gospel? And I said, no, I read the book. I've never seen The Chosen, by the way. Everyone loves it in the whole bit. I read the book. Maybe one of these days I'll sit down and watch The Chosen. So in any case, when we read the text, we see that what happens is Moses is seeing the oppression of the Hebrew people, and the way it's written, he recognizes that he is Hebrew. And then there is an Egyptian that attacks a Hebrew that treats him poorly because he's a slave, and Moses kills the Egyptian. And then later, these two Hebrews are fighting, and he's, why are you fighting each other? And they go, why? You're going to come after us like you did that Egyptian? And then he realized, people know I killed the Egyptian. And in that case, he had to flee. And that's the whole story today. So he, again, human factor, he had to run. His father, adopted father, wanted him dead, and he said, I'm out of here, and he went up to the mountains. But again, the whole thing behind the scenes is that God is aware this is going on. Now, I want you to think about that in your own life, because this is something Jesus talks about. He says every hair on your head is counted. And so there it is, every hair. And he says, in other words, he knows exactly what's going on. He also knows how many hairs you have on your head, which he also knows I have less now than I once had. So it's a little easier to count, but we're not going to go there. But anyway, he says all the hairs on your head are counted. He knows everything. So God's doing things behind the scenes. This is a powerful reality because God is God. We had this great line in the Navy. And I love it. It's a great line. And I actually used this with somebody, which I'll tell you in a second. The chief would tell you to do something. And, of course, being in the Navy as long as, you're in a while and you go, the chief tells you to do something, you do it. As a matter of fact, the enlisted had more respect for the chief than anybody else. That was always the case because he was one of us. And you see that all along. So anyway, but sometimes you get this new guy on board and you go, why do I have to do that? Why do I have to do everything the chief says? And our response would always be, because he's the chief and you are not. So the same thing is, he's God, God is God, and you are not. And there's a couple things to come to understand in light of that. God is bigger than you. And God will fix all our issues, maybe not overnight. We're still working on the, what do you call it? The original sin thing. He's kind of working on bringing that to a final solution. Only taken a few thousand years, but we'll go back to that. But anyway, God, your issues, your foibles, your mistakes are not too big for God to work with. So keep that in mind, and we can see that clearly here. God probably did not wish Moses to kill the Egyptian, but he worked with it once it happened, once he had to run out of town, and God knew exactly what he was going to do with Moses up in the mountains. So you see that. And that happens in your own life. And I think of that a lot. When I joined the Navy, remember, I was away from the church. I remember this because I had to, kind of talk about my experience of how much I loved. Now, remember, I used to drink like a fish. I mean, I used to drink like a fish. I used to drink beer like a fish. And remember what I said. I said this I think last week. I came to a part in my life where I had to make a decision whether to quit drinking or quit driving. And I quit driving. So I kept drinking. That's how much I drank. Do you understand? And so by doing that, I drank safely. What was it? Don't drink and drive. Okay, then I'm not going to drive. I mean, that's literally the decision I came up to. Don't drink or drive. Don't drink and drive. So what are you going to give up? I'm going to give up driving. What, are you kidding me? So anyway, and that's the way I joined the Navy. And here I am telling people I get high on life, and life is, up until about 4 p.m. And then it's, how many beers you can get in before you see double and stumble your way home. So in any case, that whole thing, that's how I joined the Navy. When I came out of the Navy, I was on my way to the priesthood, and I always say God understood that whole thing. And I've told you the story. One of the most powerful conversations I ever had was with a shipmate. I had no idea that he was a Christian, and we met in the San Diego Museum of Art. That's where I first got into art. And there's a coffee shop there. This is up in Balboa Park. If you're ever, I don't know if I'm sure it's still the same way. Balboa Park was like heaven. It was just a great place. It had all these museums up there, and we used to go there every Sunday. So anyway, I'm at Balboa Park, and I meet the shipmate who is, I see him all the time on board, but we never hung out together. And we sit down and have a cup of coffee. And in that, he just starts talking to me about how he prays and how he's a Christian and he believes in God and everything else. And I'm like going, you? And he's, yeah, he never pushed it, never the whole bit. He's just like, I'm like, wow. And that conversation changed my life. That was the conversation that brought me literally, I was on my way back to the church anyway, but that conversation changed my life. But God knew all of that back when I was drinking like a fish and just, literally every night being one of the greatest. I was kind of a stockholder of Anheuser-Busch. It wasn't that I bought their stock. It's that I drank their stock and I held it there for a little while anyway. So anyway, I should have used that. I was a stockholder in Budweiser. Really? How long do you have the stock for? Oh, usually about an hour. Sorry, never listen to someone who laughs at their own jokes. Everyone's sitting there looking on the radio going, I don't find that funny. So in any case, I come back to the church. I meet these people that change my life, and God knew about it all the time. I had an experience when I went on retreat. It was on retreat. I think this was in San Diego. And what had happened is our ship pulled into, this is a side story, Monterey in California. And wonderful experience. Never been to Monterey, go to Monterey. If you're into writing, that's where John Steinbeck lived. So you can go check out Cannery Row and everything else. And it's just a wonderful place. That's where I first met Michael Garman, and I have 2 Michael Garman statues in my room. Now I'm in a new room, still have the 2 Michael Garman statues. I remember they were selling them in Kingston, Massachusetts. They used to sell them in the store. And they were, this is true, this shows my math is bad, and they were kind of expensive. But then they sold them for half price, and I said, wow, at that price, I can buy 2. And I bought 2, brought them home and went, wait a minute, if I couldn't afford 1 at that price, how is it that if it's half price for 1, I can buy 2 of them for what would be the price I couldn't afford in the first place? How do I do that? But in any case, here, so I'm in Monterey. I have to go to this retreat in San Diego. The only way to get to San Diego is by train to get to the time I needed to do it. There's no answer. You kidding me? I've never been on a train in my life. You're kidding me. I have to sit in a train for 11 hours. Best thing I ever did. I've fallen in love with trains ever since. This got in on the train in Salinas, California, which would remind you a lot of Mayberry. By the way, the real Mayberry, which would remind you a lot of Mayberry, is Mount Airy, North Carolina. But this place would remind you, it's like, this is just like Mayberry. So I get on the train. Wonderful trip. But then I go on this retreat in San Diego. And one of the things that the priest who was given the retreat, who was also the chief of chaplains for the ComNav Surf Pack, so the commander of Naval Surface Forces Pacific, he was the chaplain to that commander and to that ComNav Surf Pack. So in any case, and here he was given this retreat, and he talks about, and in that retreat, I'm thinking of one of the things is how God is always with us, no matter good times, bad times, whatever. And I thought of all the times when all I was doing was drinking, and and everything that goes with drinking as far as getting drunk and the whole bit, and that's all I was doing. I mean, I did that for years, for about 5 years. And yet my heart was beating all that time, which meant God was not giving up on me. I always remember that experience. And then you bring behind the scenes that God was always there. Well, you see that with Moses, that here Moses is like, well, I'm being brought up in the, he obviously didn't do this, but he's being brought up by an Egyptian family who did not worship God. I mean, Moses had no idea who God was when he encountered them. We'll see that later on in the week. He had no idea. He just knows this is God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He just knows that. He learns that from God, but he had no idea because his family worshiped the Egyptian gods. So Moses has this powerful transformation experience. He's transformed by God, but God knew all along that he, who he was, what he was going to do, what, he knew before he was born, what he was going to do. We see that story in Jeremiah. He knew everything. And the same thing with you, if you think about that. And that's where the whole thing of God working through your life, and God, somewhere behind the scenes, God is always working, even though, as I talked to you in a previous time, you can go through that periods I've been going through, this difficult time being a priest in the Archdiocese of Boston and being, the whole bed. We've been down that story and saying, you put me here. I don't mind the Archdiocese of Boston, don't mind the parishes I worked at, but the whole crisis going on behind the scenes and the whole bit, not too happy about that. And there is yet, I told you, I've had my arguments with God in being a priest in the Archdiocese of Boston. Yet somehow that was all got part of God's plan. Because I'm fascinated. I came back to the church in San Diego. That's where I came back. I started coming back in the church in the Philippines, and then I came back completely in San Diego. Actually, combination of almost the entire west coast of California, San Francisco, Long Beach, San Diego, L.A., all of that had a part in me coming back to the church. We're going to come back on the other side of the break. You're listening to the Catholic Audio Media Podcast. We'll be right back. You can now leave a message for us, which we can air and discuss on this program. Just call 617-297-7452. That's 617-297-7452. 617-297-7452. Feel free to call, leave a comment, a question, or even feedback, and we may play it on the air. I can discuss your comment or question as well, so give that a try. 617-297-7452, 617-297-7452. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Patreon. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Check us out. Check what we have to offer. Previews of upcoming podcasts. Previews of upcoming columns over at catholicaudiomedia.substack.com. Your ability to comment, make suggestions, even make suggestions in upcoming programs. Check us out. Patreon.com, Catholic Audio Media. We're back, and we're at the end of our program, almost the end of our program. So we're going to continue looking at this whole story of Moses over the week and, as it continues over the next several weeks. Because this is the ultimate moment. God has his plans, and he knows what he's doing. The thing is, you can ask, well, why does it take so long? It's because, this is why I'm a real strong believer in evolution, because we have to reach the point where we can understand it. That's, what is it they say about Jesus? When did he come? He came in the fullness of time. We have to develop, time has to pass so that when he comes, we can understand what's going on. He could have come right from day one. He could have come before Moses, but people wouldn't have understood it. And God wouldn't have been able to do things the way he needed to do things. Who knows? Then people might turn around and say, hey, this guy is cool, and, the whole bit, and miss the whole point of the tension there because they wouldn't be ready yet. So this is an important distinction where we see God's plans are working behind the scenes over time. And it's God's time, not our time. St. Augustine taught on this. And when we understand that, we go, oh, so even in our own life, God is doing powerful things. And it might be a little thing that he's doing, and it might be a bigger thing that we're expecting, or it may not look so big, but he's doing this little thing is going to turn into a big thing. but he's doing. And that's the thing, to keep that in mind. And sometimes it can be difficult, I explained earlier, to trust in that. And that's understandable. But know that God is working behind the scenes. That's a major lesson that we're going to see all week. See you later.